Hello, I'm Michael, and if you're here, it's because you're as attracted to fear as I am. On a cold winter night in the city of Boston, Jason, a young 21-year-old university student, was in his small rented room, surfing the internet. Tired of his usual social networks and curious about the rumors surrounding the deep web, he decided to explore what he believed to be forbidden and exciting territory. Jason was not a hacker or someone with advanced computer skills. He just wanted to see what lay beyond the surface of the internet. After researching tutorials and installing a special browser, he was finally able to access the dark corners of the web. The first few pages were dull and disorganized, with old forums and broken links. But after hours of exploration, Jason found something different. A website called Abyss Beyond the Shadows. The homepage was simple, showing just a cryptic message. Be careful what you seek. Not everything that is lost wants to be found. Below the message was a flashing red button with the word "to enter." Despite feeling a chill run down his spine, Jason clicked. When Jason clicked the button "to enter," his computer screen went dark for a moment before displaying a completely different interface. The site was minimalist, with a black background and white text that looked like it was being typed in real time, as if someone was communicating directly with it. Welcome to the Abyss. Below was a list of numbered links, all with vague and cryptic names like The Hidden Truth, The Observers, and The Path of No Return. Jason, now intrigued, clicked the link The Observers. The link took him to a live stream. The camera was fixed in a dark room, lit only by a dim lamp on the ceiling. In the center of the room there was a chair, and sitting on it was a man with his face covered by a black bag. He was tied up and motionless, while a low metallic sound echoed in the background. Jason tried to close the site, but failed. The mouse cursor was unresponsive, and the screen appeared frozen. While desperately trying to restart the computer, the transmission abruptly changed. The camera now showed the perspective of someone holding the camera and slowly walking down a dark hallway. Jason noticed that the footsteps echoed in an eerily familiar way. It was as if they were happening close to where he was. Jason finally managed to disconnect the computer and walked away from the table, his heart pounding. He tried to convince himself that it was just a coincidence, that the sounds were effects added to the broadcast. But then he heard something real. Footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Jason froze, listening intently. The footsteps stopped right in front of his door. He held his breath, hoping it was just a neighbor, but after a few seconds of silence, he heard 3 slow, steady knocks. Jason tried to calm his nerves and returned to the computer to shut it down completely. However, when he reconnected the power cord, the screen flashed and showed another message, as if someone was typing live. "Why did you leave, Jason? We are just getting started." He felt his blood run cold. There was no way for the website to know your name. He had never entered any personal information. While reading, the live broadcast camera reappeared. This time, the perspective showed someone standing in front of an apartment door. Jason's door. Jason ran to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. He checked the lock and made sure it was secure. When he returned to the computer, the website had changed again. Now it showed several still images of familiar places: his living room, his kitchen, and even the bedroom where he was. Each image seemed to have been taken at that moment, from the same angle as where he was sitting. Jason realized he was being watched, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He turned off his computer again and started searching for hidden cameras in his apartment, but found nothing. As he searched the room, he heard a sound coming from the closet in the hallway. It was a low sound, like something being dragged. With a mix of dread and determination, Jason opened the closet, hoping to find the source of the sound. But the space was empty except for a small package on the floor. The package was wrapped in black paper and tied with thick string. When he opened it, he found a single object, a flash drive. Without thinking much, he connected it to the computer. Once you did this, the site Abyss reappeared, this time showing a timer that began to count down. The message on the screen said, "Choose, continue or end now." Two buttons appeared below the timer, continue and finish. Jason hesitated, but clicked continue. The site has now shown a pre-recorded video showing Jason at different times from the previous day. He was walking down the street, sitting in a cafe, and even sleeping. Every scene seemed to have been captured by a hidden camera, but he couldn't understand how or by whom. Suddenly, the screen went black again, and a new message appeared. "You shouldn't have clicked." The sound of knocking on the door echoed once again, but this time it was louder, more insistent. Jason knew something was outside, but he didn't have the courage to open it. The knocking on the door became faster and more intense, almost as if someone was trying to break it down. Jason backed away, his heart racing as he tried to reason about what was happening. He knew there was no one in the building at that time of night. His neighbors were on vacation, and the silence of the place had been his only company for days. The computer screen flashed, displaying a new message. "The door won't hold them for long." Jason looked at the door again, but this time the doorknob began to turn slowly. He ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife he could find, and went back to the living room. The knocking suddenly stopped, leaving the apartment plunged into an agonizing silence. When Jason looked at the computer again, the live feed had returned. But this time, the camera wasn't in an unknown location. She was inside his apartment. He saw the living room exactly as it was at that moment, but from an angle that didn't make sense. It was as if someone was filming from an invisible point. On the screen, he saw himself holding the knife, looking around desperately. Then something changed. In the transmission, a shadowy figure appeared behind him, motionless but clearly present. Jason quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the computer, the figure was now closer, standing next to him on the screen. The sound of footsteps echoed through the apartment hallway. Jason knew this wasn't just paranoia. He really was being chased. But before he could react, the front door slowly opened without any noise. On the other side, the hallway was empty, but something seemed different. The walls were covered in handprints, and the air felt thick, as if the space itself were alive. He tried to close the door, but he couldn't move it. An invisible force seemed to hold it open, inviting him out. As he hesitated, the sound of something dragging in suddenly, a tall, hooded figure appeared at the end of the hallway. She had no visible face, just a shadow wrapped in black fabric. The figure paused for a moment, as if observing Jason, before slowly beginning to walk towards the open door. Jason retreated, but there was nowhere to run. He looked back at the computer, which was now displaying a countdown. 05 Gül. The message below said, "You need to choose before time runs out." Jason ran into the bedroom, closing the door behind him and pushing furniture to block the entrance. He knew that wouldn't be enough, but he needed time to think. In the corner of the room, he found something that shouldn't be there, a small door, hidden behind a closet that he had never moved before. With no other option, he opened the door and found a staircase leading down into a dark, cramped space. The air there was suffocating, but Jason went down, believing he could escape the situation. The stairs seemed endless, and the further he went down, the more the sound of footsteps echoed above him. Finally, he arrived at a space that looked like a basement, but was not the one in the building where he lived. In the center of the basement, there was a table with a computer similar to the one he used. The screen displayed the same website, Abyss, but this time with a single visible option: accept the call. Around the table, there were cameras pointed at him, all flashing red lights. Jason realized he wasn't just a victim. He was part of something bigger, something that used people like him to fuel the cycle. The sound of footsteps grew closer, and the hooded figure appeared at the top of the stairs. She began to descend slowly, each step echoing in the enclosed space. Jason knew he needed to do something before it was too late. He looked at the computer and the knife he still held. The options were clear. He could accept the call, becoming part of the system, or try to destroy everything and face whatever came next. The timer on the computer ticked 1 minute. He hesitated, but at the last second he raised the knife and struck the computer with all his strength. The screen exploded into a bright light, and the sound of a deep, distorted scream echoed through the basement. The hooded figure stopped, looking at Jason for a moment before disappearing into the darkness. When Jason returned to the apartment, he noticed that everything seemed normal again. The door was closed, the hallway was empty, and the computer in the room was turned off. But something was wrong. When he looked at the reflection in the window, he saw something that made him freeze. The hooded figure was now inside him. His eyes were dark, and an empty smile took over his face. Jason realized that even though he had destroyed the computer, the abyss, it was still alive, inside him. Before we continue, if you liked my content, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments at what time do you dare to listen to these macabre stories. Now, without further interruptions, let's move on to the next story. In the city of Leipzig, Germany, Lucas, a 28-year-old solitary programmer, spent his nights exploring the darkest corners of the internet. He'd moved to a small apartment in the historic center of the city, surrounded by old buildings and silent streets that seemed frozen in time. Skeptical and curious, Lucas always considered himself immune to the dangers that the deep web could offer. He saw it as a technical challenge, a way to test his limits. After months of exploring forums and closed communities, he found a mysterious website called The Abyss. The Abyss. The site was unlike anything Lucas had ever seen. The home page was made up of a black background with lines of code that moved as if they were alive. The only possible interaction was to click on a link that said, "Snatch the light, tear the light." Despite feeling a shiver run down his spine, Lucas couldn't resist clicking. As soon as Lucas clicked on the link, "Snatch the light," the computer screen flickered. The site has changed to a simple, minimalist interface. In the center, there was a countdown timer that started at 10:22 minutes. Below, a message flashed in red letters. "When time is up, you will see the truth." Initially, Lucas believed it was a joke or some kind of interactive puzzle. However, as the timer ticked down, the atmosphere in the apartment seemed to change. The silence, once reassuring, now weighed heavily on the environment. The monitor lights began to blink in sync with the timer, and strange sounds like whispers began to echo through the headphones connected to the computer. Lucas quickly took off the headphones, but the whispers continued, this time seeming to come from inside his own mind. With 5 minutes left, the computer screen changed abruptly. A live broadcast began, showing the inside of a dark, cluttered room. The camera appeared to be fixed in a high corner, pointing at a messy bed and a small table. Something was out of place. Lucas recognized the room. It was his. The camera showed details that only he could know. The pile of books on the floor, the cup of cold coffee on the table, even the coat he had left on the chair. But what really made him freeze was the movement in the video. In the corner of the room, a shadow slowly moved. It wasn't humanoid nor something Lucas could explain. It was a presence that seemed to absorb the light around it, growing larger as the timer slowed down. Lucas tried to close the website, but the mouse cursor was unresponsive. He pressed the buttons on the keyboard in desperation, but nothing worked. The timer continued. 3 minutes. When he got up to check the room, he noticed that the door was locked. He was sure he hadn't locked it. He ran to the window, but when he opened the curtain, he saw only darkness. There were no streets, buildings, or lights. Just an infinite void that seemed to watch him back. The timer was now flashing on the screen, bigger, as if it was shouting the count. 2 minutes. Lucas returned to the computer, hoping to find a solution. The broadcast still showed his room, but now the shadow in the corner had moved to the center. She was next to the table, where the camera seemed to capture her movement in real time. That's when Lucas noticed something terrifying. In the reflection of the screen, he saw his own image, but it was not synchronized with his movements. He turned his head, but the reflection didn't follow. Instead, he smiled. With 1 minute remaining, the message on the screen has changed. The Abyss does not seek your permission. He has already chosen you. The lights in the apartment began to flicker violently. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, but Lucas knew he was alone in the building. He tried to scream for help, but his voice seemed to disappear before filling the room. The timer has reached 0:30 seconds, and the shadow in the video grew until it filled the entire screen. It pulsed like a heart as the final message flashed. Tear off the light and see what has always been hidden. When the timer reached 0:00, the screen went black. Lucas thought it was all over, but that's when the real night of terror began. The monitor lit up again, this time showing Lucas in real time. The camera was clearly in his room, but he couldn't locate where it was installed. The transmission showed something impossible. Behind him, the shadow had taken shape. It was no longer just a presence. It was a sentient thing, with long arms and sharp claws that seemed to move in slow motion, almost savoring the moment. Lucas tried to move, but he couldn't. His feet felt stuck to the ground, and the air became thick, making it difficult to breathe. The shadow approached in the transmission as he felt something cold touch the back of his neck. He looked at the screen one last time before everything went black. When everything went dark, Lucas felt intensely cold, as if he were submerged in ice-cold water. There was no sound, light, or any sense of time. His mind seemed on the verge of collapse, but suddenly a metallic noise echoed in the distance, and the darkness began to dissipate. He opened his eyes and realized he was still in his room, but something had changed. The walls seemed closer, as if space had compressed around them. On the computer monitor, the website The Abyss reappeared, but now displayed a message in large, bright letters. You have passed through the veil. Now it belongs to us. Lucas tried to leave the room, but the door remained locked. He kicked hard, but the sound that echoed wasn't that of wood. It sounded like metal. The texture of the door had changed, as had the floor beneath his feet, which was now covered in a sticky, oil-like substance. As he looked at the walls, he noticed that they were covered in symbols, scratched deep into the surface. Each symbol seemed to pulse, emitting a faint red glow. He felt as if they were eyes, watching his every move. On the monitor, the live broadcast had returned. This time, the camera was closer, showing Lucas sitting at the table, but with something different. His reflection on the screen was smiling, with completely black eyes. Suddenly, Lucas heard a sound behind him, a slow, heavy shuffling, as if something was moving around the room. He quickly turned around, but saw nothing. However, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The monitor flashed again, displaying a message: "Run if you can, but there is nowhere to go." The lights in the room began to flicker violently, and Lucas briefly saw a grotesque figure in the corner. She was tall, with elongated limbs and pale, translucent skin, as if covered in a thin layer of wax. Lucas tried to push the window, but instead of glass, he found something cold and metallic. The outside was gone. He was surrounded by a thick darkness that seemed to press against the room, as if it wanted to enter. He returned to the monitor, which now displayed a countdown of 10 short minutes, but this time in reverse. Below, another message appeared. Sacrifice is inevitable. Choose you or them. Lucas didn't understand what the message meant until he heard the distant sound of voices. He recognized the voices of his parents and his younger brother calling out to him as if they were in the hallway. The voice in his mind became clearer. She whispered, but each word echoed in her head as if she were shouting, "Save yourself or free them. Your choice will determine your place in the abyss." The countdown continued, and Lucas knew he didn't have much time. He tried to communicate with the voices, but the response was silence, broken only by the sound of something scraping against the door, like nails scratching metal. With 3 minutes remaining, a new option appeared on the monitor. 2 buttons appeared: to accept and refuse. The button to accept flashed red, while refuse, it seemed faded. almost irrelevant. Lucas knew the choice wouldn't be simple. He felt that something or someone was waiting for his decision. He tried to click refuse, but the screen just blinked, indicating that the choice was impossible. With time running out, Lucas clicked to accept. The moment he clicked, the screen changed again. A new broadcast started, but this time it didn't show his room. It was a completely different room, lit by a cold, intense light. In the center, there was a chair, and sitting on it was Lucas, but not him, as he could see. The screen version of him was an empty shell, with lifeless eyes and a macabre smile. The camera began to rotate, showing other chairs lined up, all occupied by people in similar conditions. Lucas realized he wasn't the first, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. The website, The Abyss, it was a portal, a cycle of sacrifice and control, meant to capture those who dared push the limits of what they should know. The monitor went off for the last time, and Lucas felt his body being pulled back, as if he were being swallowed by the room itself. He screamed, but his voice was lost in the gathering darkness. The last thing he saw was his reflection in the monitor, now completely transformed, smiling with satisfaction. Lucas opened his eyes to find himself in a space that defied all logic. He was no longer in his room or anywhere he recognized. The environment around him was a mix of solid darkness and pulsing lights that seemed to emanate from floating symbols. The air was heavy, almost impossible to breathe, and every step he took seemed to push him deeper into an invisible pit. He realized he was in a place that could only be described as the Abyss, the heart of what the Abyss represented. In the distance, shapeless, humanoid figures walked slowly, as if they were trapped in an eternal march. They had no faces, just smooth surfaces where eyes and mouths should be. As Lucas tried to understand where he was, a voice echoed, not in his ears, but directly in his mind. The voice was deep and resonant, carrying a weight that seemed to crush him. "Welcome to the Abyss, Lucas. Here, everyone pays the price for their curiosity, but you can escape if you accept your new role." In front of him, a table appeared out of nowhere, with a monitor similar to the one he had in his apartment. The screen flashed, displaying a message: "Choose one. The cycle must continue." Below the message was a list of names, each accompanied by a still image of people in their homes. Lucas immediately recognized one of the names: Felix, his younger brother. The message was clear. Lucas had to choose someone from the list. He knew the choice meant condemning that person to the same fate he now faced. But if he refused, the alternative was equally terrifying: remaining in that place, consumed by the entity that ruled the Abyss. He tried to find another way out, but every time he tried to move away from the table, the surrounding environment changed, becoming more oppressive. The humanoid figures were now closer, their footsteps echoing like hammers in his mind. The monitor blinked again, and the familiar timer reappeared. 0:05 Ka. As time slowed down, Lucas noticed that the surrounding figures were moving towards him. They were in no hurry, but their presence was suffocating. Every step seemed to suck the energy out of Lucas, making it harder to think, breathe, or even stand. The monitor began to display images of Felix, laughing with friends, walking down the street, living his life. The message below the images said, "He is young. He will have the strength to bear what you could not." Lucas felt a wave of despair and guilt wash over him. He knew the sight was manipulating his emotions, but the choice still seemed impossible. With less than a minute left, Lucas finally made his decision. With tears streaming down his face, he clicked on a stranger's name on the list, someone he had never met. The monitor flashed again, this time displaying a final message: "The choice has been made, but the Abyss does not forgive." The surrounding figures stopped, and the surroundings became completely silent. Lucas thought for a brief moment that he had escaped, but before he could react, the voice returned: "You chose to betray the cycle. Now, you will be part of it, forever." The ground beneath Lucas opened up, and he fell into an infinite void, surrounded by the same pulsating lights he had seen before. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. When he finally stopped falling, he realized he was back at the monitor, but this time it was on the other side. Your image was being transmitted to a new person, someone who had just accessed the Abyss. Lucas was now part of the cycle, a prisoner of the Abyss, condemned to attract new victims to perpetuate the system. As Lucas accepted his fate, the site returned to the surface of the deep web, waiting for the next curious person. In Leipzig, in another part of the city, a new user opened the browser, clicked on the link, snatched the light, and began to explore. The cycle would never end. Before we continue, if you like my content, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments at what time do you dare to listen to these macabre stories. Now, without further interruptions, let's move on to the next story. In the heart of Berlin, between buildings with modern architecture and busy streets, I'd like a young 26-year-old freelance photographer dedicated her nights to exploring the darkest corners of the internet. Mila was fascinated by mysteries, and her curiosity had already led her to investigate urban legends, stories of disappearances, and digital conspiracies. One night, while browsing the deep web, Mila came across a website that seemed to promise answers to all her questions. Called The Truth, the site had a simple, almost rudimentary interface. The homepage displayed a single sentence: "Everything has a price. Are you willing to pay?" Below, there were two buttons: try and no. Without hesitation, Mila clicked try. As soon as Mila clicked try, his computer screen momentarily went dark. When it returned, the site displayed a new message: "Your journey begins now. You will see what should never be seen." Below the message, a video began playing. It showed a dark room lit only by a dim light from the ceiling. In the center of the room, there was an empty chair. The surroundings were silent except for a low hum that seemed to slowly intensify. Mila thought it was just an act, but something caught her attention. In the background of the video, there was a painting hanging on the wall. It was identical to one in his own apartment. Mila froze, feeling her blood run cold. She slowly stood up and looked around her room. The painting was there, exactly as in the video. When he returned to the computer, the video had changed. The camera now showed a wider view of the room, revealing a sofa identical to hers. Mila began to suspect that the broadcast was happening inside her apartment, but she couldn't find any cameras. As she frantically searched for signs of intrusion, the sound of a click echoed through the room. The front door had locked itself. Mila ran to the door and tried to open it, but she was stuck. When he returned to the computer, a new message appeared: "You accepted the price. Now prove yourself." Below the message, a timer began to count down. 0:30 Celsius. As the timer ticked down, Mila began to hear sounds coming from her apartment. There were light footsteps, as if someone was walking through the rooms. She tried to call the police, but her cell phone had no signal. The landline was also dead. Suddenly, all the lights in his apartment flickered and went out completely. The only glow came from the computer screen. When Mila looked back, she saw something that took her breath away. The camera was now showing her own living room, and she was in the center of the image. In the corner of the transmission, something moved. A dark, humanoid figure began to emerge from the shadows. She was tall, with elongated limbs and movements that seemed impossible for a human being. The figure slowly approached the camera until his face, or what appeared to be a face, took up the entire screen. Her eyes were empty, but Mila felt like she was being watched in a way she had never felt before. A new message appeared on the screen: "It's after you." Mila quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the monitor, the figure had disappeared, and the timer was ticking. 00:15, A new message appeared on the screen. "You can escape, but you have to choose." Below, two buttons appeared: sacrifice and forgiveness. Mila didn't know what they meant, but she felt that any choice would have serious consequences. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and she began to feel the air around her become heavier, as if something was approaching. She clicked, "Sacrifice." The moment he clicked, the timer disappeared, and the video changed to show a new room. This time, the camera was fixed on a high corner, showing a person sitting in a chair with a black bag covering their head. A new message appeared. "You chose him. Now complete the cycle." Next to Mila's computer, something appeared that hadn't been there before, a small flash drive. Trembling, she connected the device to her computer. The video changed again, and Mila saw the face of someone she recognized. It was her friend, Eric. He was tied to the chair, looking confused and terrified. The video flashed again, and a countdown appeared. Z010, Uko. The walls of Mila's apartment began to change. They pulsed as if they were alive, and the temperature dropped drastically. The shadowy figure appeared on the screen again, but this time it seemed to be looking directly at her. One last message appeared: "Complete the cycle, or he will be taken forever." Mila realized there was something more at play. The site wasn't just messing with her, he was manipulating his choices to perpetuate his own existence. The timer on the monitor ticked 10 and counted down quickly. Mila was paralyzed between fear and the need to act. The shadowy figure that appeared on the screen was now clearer, a grotesque, distorted being with humanoid features that seemed to constantly twist, as if in a perpetual state of pain and rage. The camera focused on Eric, tied to the chair, and showed details that Mila couldn't ignore. There were cuts on his arms, as if something or someone had begun to mark his skin with incomprehensible symbols. Eric was unconscious, but he was breathing raggedly, as if he was fighting to stay alive. As the timer ticked down to Izurun 089, a new message appeared. "The sacrifice is not yours, but you must decide who will be taken." The screen split into two transmissions. On one side, Eric, still tied up and unconscious. On the other, Mila saw something that made her fall out of her chair. It was her own image, sitting in her living room, but with completely black eyes and a macabre expression. She started to scream, but her voice seemed to be lost in the room. The walls around her began to pulse, and the shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room, watching her with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. A new countdown has appeared. 005. Zers. Two buttons appeared on the screen: Salva Eric and Save Yourself. Mila knew that each choice carried an impossible weight. If she chose Eric, she would probably be the one to face the dark fate. But if she chose herself, the guilt of condemning someone close to a terrible fate would haunt her forever. As time passed, the shadowy figure began to move towards her. His steps were slow, but each one seemed to resonate in his mind like a scream. With Zerun 2 goal remaining, Mila clicked Salva Eric. As soon as it clicked, the monitor went dark and the room was plunged into a deafening silence. Mila felt an excruciating pain in her chest, as if something was being ripped out of her. The air around her became heavier, and she fell to the ground trying to breathe. Suddenly, the screen lit up again. Eric had disappeared from the broadcast. Instead, the camera now showed Mila, but not as she looked. His image on the screen was deformed, with black eyes and a smile that widened unnaturally. The shadowy figure at his side tilted its head, as if admiring his decision. One last message appeared on the screen: "The cycle is infinite. Now you are part of it." Mila tried to get up, but realized that her hands and feet were pinned to the floor by a black substance that looked alive. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the void. The environment around him began to change again. The room disappeared, transforming into a distorted landscape, with humanoid figures similar to the one chasing her. They approached slowly, whispering words she couldn't understand. Mila realized that she had not escaped. The website, The Truth. It wasn't just a platform on the deep web. It was an entity that fed the abyss with lost souls, using despair and sacrifice as fuel. She was now logged into the site, doomed to attract new victims to perpetuate the cycle. Your image would be the next to appear on another onlooker's screen, offering impossible choices and watching as they faced the same fate. Days later, a new user somewhere in Germany found the truth. Curious, he clicked try, beginning the same journey that Mila had faced.